only two that we're looking at. We want to define and provide examples of, in this case, negative reinforcement. And then we want to use negative reinforcement, identify the use of negative reinforcers, appropriate parameters and schedules of reinforcement, and state plan for the possible unwanted effects of the use of negative reinforcement. So, all right. Before I go on to the next slide, unless it's a fancy spreadsheet, who wants to quickly summarize what positive reinforcement is? Anybody?
Adding a stimulus to increase behavior.
Addition of a stimulus to increase behavior. All right. So negative reinforcement is the removal of a stimulus that increases behavior. All right. Don't get it confused with as negative reinforcement as punishment. All right. Very different. So last week had all sorts of candy. Granted, today is the day before Halloween. Would that be Halloween Eve? So no candy tonight. And I'm going to not use a negative reinforcement technique. I thought about having a loud alarm outside the room. And it would go off every 5 minutes and someone would eventually stand up and turn it off. But you know what? That would just be really annoying to me as well. So not doing that tonight. So nothing sneaky tonight. All right. So let's talk about negative reinforcement. Very technical definition outlined by Jack Michael. It's the occurrence of a response produces the removal, termination, reduction, or postponement of a stimulus, which leads to an increase in the future occurrence of that response. So this is the long-winded definition of removal of a stimulus that increases behavior. But they just clarified here, it could be the removal, the termination, the reduction, or postponement. So, for example, the reduction, maybe it's a really, really loud noise and you just turn the volume down. Maybe it doesn't completely go away, but that would still be considered a negative reinforcer. So, all right, and that definition's in the book. And will as well be posted on Blackboard. Oh, I know what I was going to do before I kick into everything. That's what happens when you don't follow your itinerary. Before I get into this, questions regarding the article reviews or anything that was presented last week before we put in new information? Sorry. Any questions about any of that stuff? Yes.
Just one quick question.
One quick question.
When I was doing the quiz,
Yes.
you know, the right up corner, and there's answer save or not save. There's sometimes hide information. It's very hard to read.
Right, and I know that was brought up a little bit last week. That's a Blackboard issue that I don't think I can address at all unless I rewrite all my questions to be smaller and fit into that space. So I know one of the... Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah, it happens some periodically, and it happens on some of the things I make for quizzes or tests. But when you have that saved option, it covers
A word.
maybe even several words. And you kind of have to look at it and try to see if you can read the words underneath that saved option.
Is it possible to remove that save option?
I need to talk to Rayanne about that because I don't know why it does that. It just does that. If your sentence is long enough.
And I'm very verbose, so...
Well, and I am too, so it does go over into that arena, and sometimes it just happens. And
Can't hit enter and start a new line?
Not the way in Blackboard.
Yeah.
Because it's a...
I will talk to
wrap
Rayanne about
text.
that, but yeah, there are times when I can figure out what the words are, but there was one or two times where I couldn't
Yeah.
figure out what the words underneath that saved answer option was.
Yeah, that could be a real problem if it's
Yeah.
like
It
clarifying,
kind of
define this
messes,
word and
it messes
that
with your
code.
mind, shall we say.
It's just another psychological experiment.
That's right, he says that.
Yeah, but we can get informed consent on that one, do we?
Person that has rights over you has given me cassettes, so you can talk to her.
Those atoms that can set those.
Yeah, if it becomes too much of an issue on it does it for 9 out of the 10 questions and you're totally guessing on those, definitely let me know and hopefully we can talk to her.
I'll talk to Rain. I don't know why it does that, but it just does it.
So worst comes to worst, I can just go to all handwritten.
It's an also needs copy and paste, I just do that.
Just
to
do that,
see
yeah.
where, paste it on a Word document or something to see what the whole sentence.
Yeah.
It's time.
It's a little bit, yeah. So, all right, and I did change it, so.
Thank you for doing that,
Yeah.
because that really helped, because like, some of those, sometimes when you put, an answer in and it's saved, then it takes a few seconds. I don't know if other people are having the same problem with it. Sometimes it took as much as a minute or a minute and a half for it to move on to the next one. So that really, really, really did help.
Yeah, so yeah, I have it now, so all 10 questions, or however many questions, should be displayed at once. So if you do the whole copy and paste, you don't have to do it for each question now. So, and you can go back and forth from questions to questions. So, yeah, I just changed it like an hour or two ago, so.
Oh, I was talking about the 20 minutes. You moved it
Oh.
from 10 to 20 minutes.
Yeah,
That was helpful in
That I
and
did
of
last
itself.
week, yeah.
Boy, that.
And it shouldn't have been 10 minutes to begin with. I think that was the default that it just kicked and I forgot to change it.
Okay.
So, yeah, they're all supposed to be 20 minutes.
That helped because, like I said, the technical problems driving us crazy.
So any other questions, complaints? Okay, I thought maybe I was supposed to be a cat or something. Like,
This is kind of bad at it.
I should have kept going.
How many days do you have to wait before you can retake a quiz?
I'll reset it every Thursday. If something happens to me on Thursday, it'll be on Friday. But
So once a week you can take it?
once a week, yeah. So if you want to be really, really savvy, you want to take it like Wednesday night, so you know it's reset the next day, so it's a little better in your short-term memory, that's fine.
That's a good idea.
So,
What about midnight Wednesday night?
well, see,
Would that work?
See, the thing is, I don't know when I'm going to be resetting it. Sometimes if my Thursday mornings are good and I'm not doing much,
Okay.
you can maybe talk to Keith. If he wants to handle all my meetings Thursday mornings, that's fine with me. I'll make sure I set up my little stiff card. So, all right, any other questions? Nothing? You guys ready for some new knowledge then? Or old knowledge being reinforced? So, all right, so back to, yes?
You could connect it if you just want to use the clicker.
Oh, no, I'm all fidgety. I had a cup of coffee and now I'm just like, wow.
You need something.
Yeah, I can be moving. So let me know if I'm talking too fast.
You know the half-life of caffeine is 6 hours, right?
And me, I'll probably burn it off at 3. So, all right. So one of my favorite activities, it's a vocab review. So we're going to pair up with people again and do their best to put these in layman's definitions. Escape contingency, avoidance contingency, social negative reinforcement, and automatic negative reinforcement. So I will give you guys, I think I allotted 15 minutes for this.
Well,
All right. Oh, wow, that was long.
somebody didn't bring a book, so it's not my fault.
All right. I'll give you guys until 7:30, and then I'll check in.
Oh, okay. Wow. Somebody's doing it with a book. Escape. Avoidance. And social media. This is chapter 12. Yeah, chapter 12, right? I did read it. There was an English lunch, remember?
Okay, this is like.
Yeah.
What is it?
My apologies for your missing the class. I think a lot of activities are related to the reading.
Oh, there's a good
That's good. I'm trying not to hide that on this one.
That's gonna have
Compare that,
maybe.
it says
And I have my notes.
Go back.
I feel like going to get them.
Time? We're all good? All right, everyone's clear? Perfect. All right, there are lots of questions about escape and avoidance, so this is good. And then we'll talk about those other two. Before we clarify escape and avoidance, I want to go back to our four-term contingency. So let's start with number 3. What goes in this box for number 3?
Behavior.
Behavior. All right. What always follows the behavior? The consequence. What precedes the behavior? Antecedents. And what influences the value of that consequence? The MO, the motivating operation. All right. So, yeah, Moab. All right. So, having that up there will help explain some of this. Who wants to summarize the escape contingency?
These two are pretty good at it.
Are they? All right.
She just brought
Yeah,
it
well,
to
you
you
got it.
I'm sitting here taking diligent notes.
Yeah, don't sit next to
me because those are motivating one of you.
I was gonna say, that was completely unplanned, but that was perfect escape.
There you go.
You know,
my definition.
She did illustrate it, so we're done. We're done.
I'm
It's
taking
done.
notes and I'll also be escaping. I'll just be taking notes.
All right, so who wants to summarize what escape contingency is? You can read the definition straight out of the book if you're still confused, and I'll take that.
Go ahead, Dora. I used to do it.
Preventing something.
You do something,
All right.
you do something to stop the stimulus that you don't want it.
Yes, so you do something to stop the stimulus from occurring. Okay? Now, how about avoidance?
You prevent it.
Postpone.
Prevent it.
Postpone is a perfect way, or preventing that stimulus from even occurring. So, anyone want to really try to hone in on the difference with these two? All right, I'll do it. That's my job anyway. Okay.
One
So-
says it's occurred, so you stop it, but the other one you prevent it from occurring, so it didn't occur yet. You
Exactly.
just don't let it
Exactly.
happen.
So, in regards to the antecedent, in this case, these will all basically be SDs. So, the SD is occurring, so that loud bell is ringing, and your behavior is to smash that bell to pieces. That's escape. This has already occurred. In regards to avoidance, you're doing something so that loud bell doesn't even start. That's avoidance. The classic, what's the word? The classic experiment that I believe Skinner, I know Skinner did it, but was he had a rat in a cage, though, I can't remember if the book talks about this experiment or not.
Yeah,
A
until.
bright light.
Oh, no, I was actually
Or
talking,
light.
no, I was actually talking about a different
Killer.
one, so maybe this isn't the
I
classic
think it
one.
was.
Keller, 1941, a lab research, the rat was placed in a chamber with a bright light turned on,
Oh.
and the rat pressed the lever to turn the light off.
Okay, see, I'm thinking of a different one with shock that they did this way. So they had the rat on a metal floor, and an electric shock would go off.
Oh, the dog,
Rat.
there was a dog, and it was about learned helplessness, but maybe this is a different one.
This is
Yeah.
probably a different one. So learned helplessness sounds like a very private event. So we're-
It's shocking an animal.
yeah, so, yeah, this was back before that was all involved. So electric floor, the electricity would go off, the rat learned if you push the lever, the electricity would stop. So that was the escape piece of things. They then did alarm would go off, and then there'd be a 2-second delay, and then the floor would electrify. And so the rat learned that when the bell went off, push the lever, and that would prevent the floor from being electrified. And that was the avoidance contingency piece of things. So the electrocution never actually happened. So, make sense? Does that really help escape avoid? All right. So when you try that stuff in my class, I'll know immediately what you're doing. I'll be like, you're avoiding. All right. Who wants to try? Whoa, hey, no. All right. Who wants to try social negative reinforcement?
Keith and Dora did really good.
Well, the automatic one is when you do something that reduces the negative or aversive stimuli. So you would do something, your behavior increases to reduce the aversive stimuli. But in the social negative reinforcement, you ask somebody else to do something, their behavior goes up,
Alright.
to avoid the aversive stimuli.
Yep. Everyone got that?
Yeah.
All right. Oddly
Review it
enough,
once again. Say it once
And,
again.
oh, no.
So there's this loud sound going on, and it's aversive to you, right? And so if it's social negative reinforcement, I ask Keith to go turn the radio off. If it's automatic, I get up and I go turn the radio off.
Or when your wife says, "I'm cold," you get up out of bed and you go adjust the thermostat.
to avoid,
Or then the husband gets up and gets
Or to
something for the
escape.
wife to drink. So, yeah.
so in regard to social negative reinforcement, particularly in an educational environment, we see a lot of kids that may, have aggressive behavior towards another student because they're really bothering them, and so they whoop the snot out of them. And so they're removing that kid's annoying behavior, and so they learn every time I whoop up that kid, they're going to stop that behavior, and so their behavior of physical aggression increases to prevent, those social pieces. But yeah, the husband getting up to, turn down the thermostat or let the barking dog out
That
to avoid
That
nagging.
never happens.
Never happens?
Never
Okay.
happens. Never.
And I'm not sure why. I'm gonna have to figure this one. Out before I post them on Blackboard. On my notes section, I have two completely different words. I have free operant avoidance and
Oh,
discriminative
that's in there,
avoidance.
the free operant is in there.
And the social.
In the
neg-
text.
It's under escape and avoidance.
Oh, okay.
continuing. Yeah.
So maybe I was just
that-
trying to clarify things in the notes. So, yeah, okay, all right. All righty, so, any questions about any of those? Moving on.
So just to make sure, so the social negative reinforcement is when you ask someone else to do the behavior, or it's when
You're influencing somebody else.
And their behaviors.
Yeah. Always keep in mind that the behavior is related to that organism that you're looking at. So something they do will increase the frequency of the future occurrences of those behaviors. So, yeah. All right, any other questions? So the fun thing about this, Axio, next slide.
Definitely caffeine.
I've become much more comfortable presenting with you guys.
I wish I had a cake for you.
Give them more coffee.
Yeah, if you guys come in next week with like 10 coffees, you're in trouble. So, alrighty. Jack Michael, in 1975, he emphasized the importance of specifying the type of environmental change produced by a response in terms of key stimulus features that comprised both the pre-change and post-change conditions. I think I said last week, Jack Michael doesn't know how to speak in words less than 3 syllables, so everything he writes is very confusing. But he makes a very good point here, and I posted an article today on Blackboard along with 2 follow-up articles about negative reinforcement and whether it's even a term that needs to be out in the behavior analytic world. And there are all sorts of responses by Jack Michael, Brian Iwata, Littell, pretty prestigious behavior analysts about whether negative reinforcement even needs to be a term. So,
Yeah, I've noticed in some articles that it is hard because they don't clarify in the article whether it was really, truly positive reinforcement or negative reinforcement. So I really got it when he made this comment that maybe they're one and the same depending on how you look at the situation. So why don't we just look at pre-change versus post-change? But it was interesting to note in the book that after they said this, they basically said nobody else commented on this stuff. After this article was written, nobody really explored this. It just kind of disappeared from, and if anything, negative reinforcement started to be talked about more in the literature than this being considered as an option.
yeah, and so he made this in 1975. Brian Iwata, forget when he brought it up once or twice. But the article I posted where someone kind of rehashed this argument wasn't until 2005. And they're like, no, everyone's been discussing this at conferences and, underground, but no one's ever really published it and said, let's have an online discussion about it. So what Jack Michael was essentially saying is we don't need to have positive reinforcement, negative reinforcement, positive punishment, negative punishment. All we care about is the end behavior. Does it increase or decrease? We could just say, reinforcement, punishment procedures. But several behavior analysts said, no, we need to really distinguish whether it's a presentation of the stimulus. And Brian Iwata is one that really emphasized this fact that we need to have this these distinguishing features. So, I posted those articles on. I think they're pretty interesting reads, but I'm a boring guy. So, but to kind of drive this point home, what is that? I don't know.
Coffee.
That was a clicker. So,
I didn't see it.
I think it's more pilot than plane.
once again, we're blaming the stimulus, which drives the point home here. Was it me or was it the clicker? Was it the coffee? So the question is, how can one determine if the increase in behavior is due to a positive or negative reinforcement? So a couple of examples that were in that article that I pulled out, which I thought were good examples. Wow, I'm just full of perfect examples. The very first one's actually involving the thermostats. Someone knew ahead of time, made this room cold, that's what it was. So, if you walk into a room and you're cold, and you turn the thermostat up, is that the removal of the cold or the addition of heat? Because the removal of cold would then constitute negative reinforcement. Every time it's cold, you turn the thermostat up. Or is it positive reinforcement because you're adding heat to the room?
Depends on the
Depends on the heating system. You got a heat
Depends
pump.
on the individual and why their behavior, what's modifying their behavior. That'd be specific to the individual acting upon the behavior.
Okay, so it's the individual acting upon the behavior. But in the temperature case, which would it be then?
The cold is negative.
Okay.
So they're wanting more heat to remove the cold.
Okay. But so they're adding more heat into the environment. So that'd be positive reinforcement.
But the person doing it wouldn't think that way.
Okay.
So if I'm cold, I'm not thinking, I want more heat. I'm thinking, it's really cold. I need, to get rid of this cold. Is there a jacket? Is there a blanket? What can I do in this space to remove the cold?
Okay.
And if the thermostat is all I have as an option, I'm going to pump up the heat.
Okay. So you're defining it as the individual's definition of what's going on with that environment. Okay. And that was one of the arguments in, I forget who it was that said that. But then the counter argument is that's a private event, not identified by behavior analysts. How do I know whether you're thinking I'm removing cold or I'm adding heat?
In the chapter somewhere, I remember reading something about where they were trying to figure out whether it was positive reinforcement or negative reinforcement, and they were looking at praise, attention, and escape. And so they tested both hypotheses with the same sample and found out in that particular, with that particular population, it was, or that one person, it was primarily escape that one student, one young person who's trying to engage.
And so what was the stimulus in that?
I can't even remember now. I can't even remember if it was in this chapter. All I know is that what they did is they targeted both contingencies, and they found that it seemed to be more related to negative reinforcement than it was positive reinforcement.
Is it, I'm just going off on a limb here, is it possible that one is dependent on the other? If you're gonna look at it from, well, technically, the water's half full or half empty.
Correct.
Well, it's theoretically from a behavioral, if you're not gonna get into the psyche of the motive behind the behavior, then you're just gonna simply look at the action or the situation for what it is, then they're both dependent on each other, really.
Yes.
In order to get a positive, you need to put a negative in there.
And one of the individuals said in this article that you really do have to look at the dichotomy of the situation, that yes, there's always going to be an addition or removal of something. It kind of comes down to then, like you said, what motivates the individual. And we'll talk later about what satiation and habilitation are, and the addition or subtraction of those stimuli, how that may influence a behavior, and that all comes in our motivating operation chapter. So we'll delve into this a little bit more here. I'm going to give you another example, and just simply, thought. This one, I think, I personally have a much more definitive definition on this one. Another example they used was a headache. So you have a headache, you take an aspirin. Is it the addition of the aspirin that's positively reinforcing your behavior to remove that headache? Or is it the removal of the headache that positively reinforces you, negatively reinforces you to go seek out medication? So, and then this one goes down to the jargon, and why it's really important to learn the jargon. Littell and Littell, and this article stated it best in my opinion. They talked about a token economy, providing access to items. Clearly, all the literature would probably agree that this is a positive reinforcement, having access to items. But when we're talking about using a token economy to get food, then we're talking about food in regards to, are you adding food to basically positively reinforce your behavior? Are you removing hunger? That would be a negative reinforcement of your behavior. And the reason that they delve into this piece is because they talk about how behavior analysts have these very technical jargon about negative reinforcement, positive reinforcement. But when talking about lawyers, and they use lawyers very specifically, looking at a token economy in the hospital setting, they work with a lot of patients to say, all right, you have to earn the opportunity to get these food items, so work to get your tokens. But is that, if they're hungry, are you denying them the basic needs by making them work for these token economies? And so lawyers would say that a token economy is a punishment procedure instead of just saying it's negative reinforcement. So they go off on their little tangent about why it's really important for behavior analysts to have this technical jargon, to be able to explain it to lay people, but maintain this technical jargon so that way we're not necessarily watering down the field. So it's an interesting read. It's not embedded in any of your quizzes, but if you ever want to get into some of this, and we'll get a little bit more in the ethics class, but I just want to point out that when we're going through these articles and you're really struggling, is this positive reinforcement, negative reinforcement? There'll be some leniency on my grading piece of things. So
on the exam, like the board exam, are the questions that specific, like talking about what you said about?
I would say no, and I don't know how the exam is now, but when I took it, they were really nice about saying, here's the question. If you think there's more than one answer, they gave you a little blurb where you could type in and argue why you chose a certain thing. And so this would be a perfect example of saying, well, Jack Michael in 1975 argued that, there shouldn't necessarily be positive or negative reinforcement. And if you spat that out, they'd probably give you the answer. I'd say, that's fine. But usually, I would assume, and I honestly can't remember, I would assume they would probably say something very blatant, like, the student was given tokens whenever they engaged in behavior, that token as the stimulus was removed from the situation. And then you could say, all right, well, clearly they're talking about that. So, when you read the article, I'm all about agreeing with Brian Iwata's perception that the stimulus has to be visible and noticeable to the individual. The temperature one is very fuzzy, but in regards to the headache one, I'm adamant that that's considered positive reinforcement because you can actually see the aspirin, measure how much aspirin you're taking, and collect data on that versus saying, well, 70.5% of my headache was removed. So I lean towards Brian Iwata's definitions, but if you ever want to argue another one, I'm fine with that. So, all right, that was my little tangent and speech for tonight. I think the rest of the night is pretty much you guys doing activities. So, any questions before you get stuck doing activities? That's what I like to hear. All right. All right, so with that, activity 1. So, items such as food, money, and praise are typically associated and are utilized as positive reinforcers. Within that discussion, identify methods, and we kind of already did this, in which food, money, or praise may be utilized as negative reinforcers. So, I would say get in, let's try to get in groups of, is 5 too many? So we have 15 tonight. Let's see how groups of 5 do. If there's too much discussion and argument, then I'll split down to smaller things. So, groups of 5. I would say you two just turn around and join those 3. You two can turn around and join those 3. Present their example first. Team Skinner. Instead of like group 1, group 2, you know. I'll start throwing out some of these big names. So.
Which one's the one with the casket?
That's Schroeder. Don't know if the cat's alive or dead.
Toby that name.
No. All right, who wants to be Team Skinner? Nobody wants to provide their example first? You guys. All right. So first of all, it always helps to define what your target behavior is before you talk about anything else. So what's your target behavior?
For food, our target behavior is for the child to finish homework right after he got out from school.
Okay, so homework completion. Okay. What is the stimulus that you're going to be using?
The removal of eating veggies.
So eating veggies. So remove, well, here, we just put veggies. Veggies. Okay. All right, so you're removing veggies to increase homework completion. Explain.
It's like some child doesn't like eating veggies, so his mom would say, if you do homework right after school, then you don't have to eat veggies for dinner.
Okay. So,
That's pretty good.
yeah, so that kind of goes along with what we talked last week about reward.
Yeah.
So by preempting the fact that if you do your homework, you don't have to eat your veggies, what's ideal is that you say to the kid, you need to go get your homework started. That's your SD. So go get your homework started. If the kid starts their homework, the mom can say, hey, you know what? You're doing your homework really well. I'm going to take a piece of broccoli away. So the kid's like, oh, really? Cool. So hopefully down the road, they'll learn every time I do my homework, I'm going to get some aversive stimulus, removed. So therefore, his homework completion starts to go up. So you're using some unwanted food. It's very much like that pre-back principle. You totally took my example away. So that's good. All right. I know you guys said some other ones, but we're going to move on to other groups. So good work, Team Skinner.
We'll go back to this. So our,
Oh, you guys want to be Team Iwata? All right.
Iwata, yes.
He's the premier on like functional analysis. All right.
so the behavior is to eat more vegetables.
Okay. So you guys are eating veggies.
Right. And the stimulus is dessert.
Okay.
So if we take away the dessert
So removal of dessert
in order to increase the behavior.
to increase veggie eating. So the kid's eating his veggies.
Kid doesn't want to eat veggies. If we want to increase that behavior, we tell them no dessert until you eat your veggies.
Okay.
So we would be removing the dessert in order to increase the behavior of eating their vegetables.
Okay. So
Does that make sense?
it does. I'm trying to think how you would actually do this, though. So I guess the way you could do it is you would have, let's say, a big old brownie sitting there next to his veggies. He's sitting there, and so you take a chunk of brownie away. So, and then he maybe puts a carrot in his mouth, and you don't touch the brownie. Yeah, that would work. So, Yeah. I can
But
see
the
that.
brownie would have to be visible in front of the kid? Is that what you're saying?
Yes.
Or could it be
Okay.
based on the expectation that dessert is every night?
If he knows that dessert is delivered every night, but the problem with that is he would need to know the exact amount of dessert delivered every night. Otherwise, it looks like you're just giving him dessert.
Right.
So anytime you're kind of presenting that dessert, then I would start to argue that's positive reinforcement versus having that dessert there and you're taking chunks of it away. And that's what we call, it'd be called essentially like a response cost. If he's not eating his veggie, he starts to lose his stuff. Yeah.
So would it be like cookies, if I had 2 cookies or 4 cookies, I start taking cookies away?
Oh.
Yep.
Yeah, because
Yeah.
Because we eat the veggies?
Yeah. And once again, this kind of goes down to Jack Michael's argument of, are we really increasing or decreasing the behavior? How are you defining it? Which is why I'm so adamant about very specifically defining your target behavior and whether looking at that is increasing or decreasing, based upon your stimulus. So yeah, all right. You guys get Team Sundberg, who,
Sundberg?
yeah, he does the VB map and some good assessment stuff.
So if you have to state the stimulus before getting the person to do the behavior, then that makes it like a reward?
Makes it a reward. And so that comes down to, we talked last week about the difference between rule-governed behavior and contingency-shaped behaviors. Contingency-shaped behaviors are always much stronger because it goes into what we haven't talked about yet, schedules of reinforcements. If you never have any idea whether you're going to get something or lose something based upon your behavior actually starts to be shaped and stronger and maintained better with that unexpected expectation. Whereas if you know something's coming, you are strictly doing that behavior for that item. And so you very rarely do it spontaneously. You're always, I'm not going to do it until I know that a reward is presented. Which is why in classrooms, it's killer to behaviors when teachers start telling kids, if you guys are on task for X amount of time, let's say, if you guys finish your assignment in 30 minutes, you'll get extra recess. The next day, the kids are going to sit there and refuse to do their assignment until the teacher offers them some incentive. Whereas if they're constantly on the edge of their seat, well, maybe if we do it, we'll get something, maybe not, doesn't matter. It actually.
Yeah, we actually
strikes
touched that on that last Tuesday, in fact, Cole's class, and that's how gambling addiction get formed. It's because of the intermittent reinforcement.
Yep, exactly. So yeah, it all comes out of intermittent reinforcement. And we'll talk, hopefully Paul talks a lot about it, but when you're teaching new behaviors, you typically want to do a fixed schedule, what's called a fixed schedule of reinforcement, then into an intermittent schedule of reinforcement. Very similar when you're trying to decrease behaviors, but we'll talk extensively about that next quarter. So, yeah.
Just automatically give them more time.
Does this kind of remind me of like when you watch The Biggest Loser or something?
My
teenagers
and some kids
to
will
reduce their
Oh,
calories. And then at the end of the week, they get to stand up on the scale and, I lost all this weight. So it kind of perpetuates the emphasis to keep reducing your calories.
Yep. So this is perfect because now you can start seeing how you just take the theory and it applies to all these different fields as long as you understand the theory. If we start talking about very specific strategies like, in a classroom you must use a token economy to do such and such, you lose the broad scope of saying, this is why that functions so well. So this is why I really want to emphasize you guys learn theories versus, specific strategies. So that'll make you much better behavior analysts and more adaptable to any field. All right, Team Sundberg.
So you want us to purposely use the one we were using that you laughed at?
No, I want you to add that in at the end here.
Oh.
Use the first one you guys gave,
The token one?
unless you thought of a better one.
The money.
Oh, the one where there was a bank and,
Okay.
That one?
So what's your behavior?
Because they
Okay.
increase cleaning your room.
oh, is that what we're talking about?
Oh, you didn't, no, we didn't, but let's just use that
Whoa!
one. Increase cleaning your room.
I don't remember.
So the behavior is planning ahead. The removal of public humiliation.
If this is one that I think you're talking about, that the desired behavior is to stay on task
Okay.
for X number of minutes.
On
Say-
task.
Yeah. for 6 minutes.
Okay.
Okay, we're using a token system. The tokens are in front of the kid.
Okay.
If he or she does not stay on task for X number of minutes, a token is taken away. Okay? Or X number of tokens is taken away.
This is very similar to the one that, of the eating veggies and stuff.
I have
So-
I was in a classroom once where the teacher gave the kids 2 tokens, like poker chips, every time they came in the classroom in the morning.
Mhm.
And then they would have to put them on their desk, and then when they were off task, she would just take one
Yep.
away. And then they needed a certain amount of tokens to get into like the party on Friday.
Yep.
So that would be an example.
Nope. That's an example of negative punishment.
Okay.
Because there, her target behavior is off-task behavior. And so she's removing a token to try to decrease that off-task behavior. In this case, you're trying to increase on-task behavior. So it's kind of like our brownie dessert example. It's not the best one, but you can argue that, if you remove the token, ideally the on-task behavior would increase. So it's not the cleanest example. So, but you guys were in discussion in regards to hunger. And now blank on exactly what your example was. You were talking about if someone.
The kid is not eating is not cleaning his plate at dinner. And
That's right, it's the snacking.
and we hypothesize that that behavior is because there's a lot of in-between meal snacking. So we hypothesize if you remove the snacks, the kid's appetite will go up and he will clean his plate or her plate.
All right.
Right back. I thought that was
Actually, this kind of helps clarify what's going on here. So the stimulus removal always falls on the consequence. So what you're talking about is something prior to the behavior occurring,
Yeah, I guess so.
which then involves hunger. And so this snacking changes the value of dinner. All right.
Okay.
So
Cause and effect.
cause and effect, but in this case, it's changing the value of dinner. So what in our forward-term contingency changes the value of a reinforcer? The MO, which is almost always related to respondent behavior. So in this case, hunger. So if you don't let the kid eat, the value of dinner goes up. So, or if you let them snack, the value of food decreases. So in this case, removal of snacks is actually an MO situation.
So it's not negative.
It has nothing to do necessarily with one of those 4 principles of behavior. This is the 5th principle of behavior. So, and we haven't talked about motivating operations, but if you could remember that example, when we do that activity, you'll be set.
I got it right here.
What about, we're thinking of the negative reinforcement for money, like at a job. Stimulus will be taken away the bonus money, and the behavior will be the increase in sales.
So taking away the bonus money would increase sales? I doubt that would be the situation, but I guess if someone didn't like money, they might increase their sales so they don't get the bonus. They actually had a really good money one. Do you guys want to share your money one? For your workaholic?
We'll try. It's like, the target behavior is like to improve the actual payment standard. It's like to make people work more effectively or efficient.
Yeah.
And the,
Well-
stay
Yeah.
more at home.
Do you want me to go through the example?
Yes.
Okay. So, because I think this is a good one. So people have heard the term workaholic, all right? It can influence, family dynamics where, someone's at work all the time and the nuclear family falls apart. So in this case, this would be a really good example because this is a socially significant behavior. And so this is something that a behavior analyst would be involved in. Eating veggies, unless the kid's really, malnourished, probably not a socially significant behavior. But in this case, this is affecting lots of individuals. So this person is just constantly working and working and working, and maybe their motivation is money. They know they work 60 hours a week, they're going to make a ton of money, much more than they would at 40 hours a week. So what they would do as the behavior analyst is they would actually tax the individual over any hours that they worked over 40. So now the individual is actually making less money for any time over 40 hours. And so that would hopefully increase their stay-at-home behavior, which is what you're trying to do.
Okay.
So it's a, you know,
That's a good one.
yeah, so that's, I think that was a really good one.
Okay.
So props to Team Skinner. Team Skinner gets 1 bonus point.
Yay!
All right. See, then I lost the clicker. That's the problem. It's that coffee again. All right.
Yeah.
So that was fun. All right, activity 2 time. No rest for the weary. All right. In the context of binge drinking at fraternities or bars, how can alcohol be classified as a social or automatic reinforcer? Oh, okay, there's something there. Okay. So, in your group, oh, sorry, binge drinking is when you just drink and drink and drink and you become really, really drunk.
The drinking person to be more social.
So this is,
Then it classifying.
I actually have not read a whole lot of research on this, but this
You
is
could.
a lot based on my own theory of why there's a lot more alcoholism that develops in college more than anywhere else. So, we're going to talk about this one as a whole group, not divided into, you know, individuals. We'll just call this one Team ABA. All right. So, before we get into too much discussion, just quick flipping just to make sure I reinforce my own thinking. Automatic reinforcers, they are, you know, related to that respondent behavior. So anything that has to do with pain, hunger, sleep deprivation, all those various things. Those are the, you know, what's related to automatic reinforcer, punisher, whatever it may be. In your book, once we get to motivating operations, those are all, I won't all say all, but in general, all related to motivating operations. One that's not listed in there that I argue should be considered an automatic reinforcer for human beings is just social interaction. All right. It's Jack Michael didn't list in his 9, and I think that's probably because a lot of stuff that was done with animals, even though a lot of animals crave social interaction as well. But as human beings, I definitely think if we don't have social interaction, we go crazy. So it's a necessity. So I would label, you know, social interaction as an automatic reinforcer. So in general, social reinforcer, you know, obviously involves other individuals. So before I go any further, I'll open up to discussion by the class here. What were some of your discussions surrounding? So, Team Iwata, let's start with you guys. What did you guys discuss? Not necessarily answering this question specifically, but what were some of the topics you guys talked about?
Well, peer pressure.
Peer pressure?
Popularity.
Okay.
Alcoholism.
So peer pressure causing you to drink? Okay. So in order to fit in socially, you drink. Okay. So.
The influence that you see others doing it, you do.
Okay. So kind of that modeling.
Yeah.
Okay. Good.
Fitting in.
Fitting in. Okay. So.
Encouraging the behavior, so
Let go.
I
go,
get
go.
positive fame from others if I do this behavior.
Okay. So socially reinforced for drinking. Okay. So how about you guys? What did your discussion kind of surround?
Could be availability of the drinking, of the alcohol. So it's available, so you drink it, you know.
Okay, so the availability, which kind of goes along with that motivating operation. I mean, if it's, well, no, I guess it wouldn't, but more of the antecedents. If an antecedent's salient, you're more likely to engage with that. So, okay, so the availability of it. Any other pieces? No. So I had this kind of theory that typically in like middle school, high school, that's usually when individuals feel the most socially awkward and they're trying to fit in with their peers. All right. So they start developing that that social, well, that automatic reinforcement of, all right, if I start talking to my peers, I'll get some interaction. All right, I'm reinforced by that interaction. Great, I really need my peers, and I need to fit in. But when they go off to college, a lot of times their peer groups are all separate at different colleges, and now they no longer have that peer group. And so the only way, that goes to this modeling, the only way that they see social groups is involved with alcohol. And so they want a social group, so they join a fraternity. And so alcohol has now been paired with social groups. And so they're like, the more I drink, the more social I am, the more engaged I am. My confidence goes up that I can interact with individuals. So then they graduate from college, and they have their work group or even some of their peer groups around. But what they've now conditioned themselves with is, I drink to be social,
Right.
instead of social, I drink. So now it doesn't matter whether they're at home or at a bar, they drink because they feel that drinking builds up their confidence.
That's familiar.
It's familiar. So the alcohol now has become, essentially their friend, their automatic reinforcer, all due to that stimulus pairing. So I would argue that if we can find peer groups and activities and hobbies that you're moving into college, you're less likely to have a lot of that alcoholism, which is why I would argue, minus football teams, but like soccer teams and sports groups, they have an automatic social group,
Right.
minus that influence of alcohol. So,
And the workplace too, I can see that continuing because there's happy hour. After work, go, hey, let's go get a beer after
Well,
work.
and
Well, that sounds very familiar to college.
Yeah.
Hey, let's have a beer to socialize.
and I would argue the people that really want happy hour are the ones that really want that social interaction, and the only way they can think of it is, let's do a happy hour, instead of, hey, let's put together a bowling team, or let's go hang out and do a run or whatever it may be. So, yeah, and so bars thrive on that, which is why happy hour is immediately after work instead of later on.
That's true.
So when you're talking to an alcoholic, I would argue you always want to look at what was their history with their social interaction, and are they just trying to get that social interaction back, and they've found it through alcohol. So you have to take that stimulus pairing and uncondition it. So, but that's my own theory. Some people might go into they had an abusive father that drank a lot or whatever it may be, but I argue it's stimulus pairing. Yeah.
I have a question, and it kind of goes back to the basic, but I'm getting really confused right now.
Okay, absolutely.
When I see the definition of stimulus, but I'm having difficulty when it comes to putting it in this way, the stimulus behavior. I'm having difficulty seeing it there.
Yep.
Can you perhaps give an example of another definition of stimulus that could be more classical, visual? I don't know.
So, all right. So how about you have the definition of stimulus right there? So read it out for all the jargon. This is why we do the activities at the beginning. So you're going to read it out in the technical definition. I'm going to have someone else break it down.
Okay. An energy change that affects an organism through its receptor cells.
Okay. So that's a very technical medical definition of it. All right. So who wants to break that one down? How would you read it again?
An energy change that affects an organism through its receptive cells.
So you can hear it, see it, touch it, smell it, feel it. That's the
Taste it.
stimulus. It exists.
Yep.
That's the stimulus.
Yep. So anything in your environment that causes some bodily input to you. All right.
So this is reptile brain stuff.
Yep.
So a bright light
So-
to the eyes.
Bright light to the eye.
A pin in the arm.
Yep.
Type of thing.
Food given to you, a red light. So a stimulus, in our four-term contingency, where would a stimulus lie?
Antecedent.
Antecedent, as well as, what else? Consequence. So stimulus could fall in either one.
Oh, okay.
Because there's something a bottle of Jack Daniels that you see, you drink it, and you go talk to that girl at the end of the bar because now your confidence is up.
There you go.
So,
Confidence in a bottle.
confidence in a bottle. If it doesn't work out, you got the bottle to swing. So, and now you have an abusive alcoholic. So, yeah, so stimulus, does that help at all?
Yeah.
Okay.
I thought that it had to be placed under A. That's
Nope.
why I was having difficulty.
And you missed it last week when we used the teacher example where every antecedent can actually end up being a consequence as well, and vice versa. So
Oh,
the example I talked about was, here, we'll do this quick. So behavior, consequence, antecedent, dot, 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 dot. So a student raises their hand. The teacher's behavior is to say, do you have a question? The student's behavior then is to say, yes, I do. That omits the consequence of the teacher then saying, okay, here's the answer. So now the student gets consequented for their behavior, but this is also the teacher's behavior. So every consequence antecedent behavior is somebody else's antecedent behavior consequence. And that's why, once again, it's very, very important to define what your target behavior is, who your participants are that you're looking at, because all these massive interactions are going on.
Behavior analysts ever use path modeling?
I want to say yes. Define path modeling for me real quick.
It's a analysis process that does that. Looks at the effect of A on B on C and then loops back
Yes.
around.
Yeah, I mean, that's where our functional analysis piece would come in.
Okay.
Yeah, we don't necessarily call it path modeling, but that's essentially what we're doing. Because we try to look at everything and then find patterns of what's causing that final thing to go on. So, all right. Any questions about this? Just pique anybody's interest for a possible dissertation later on? So, all right. No questions? All right, let's talk about things that actually influence our, what we call our stimulus response. So in this case, the SR, we're talking specifically about a stimulus in regards to a consequence. Okay. So maybe this will also help. When we're talking about stimulus, we're talking about all those environmental things. When we talk about an SD, that's our discriminative stimulus. That's always going to be an antecedent. And then an SR is always the stimulus response. So, all that fun jargon. Gotta love it. And if you don't love it, I'm telling you, you gotta love it. All right. So, just like positive reinforcement, we talked about how effectiveness, I can totally tell my coffee is worn off. Effectiveness is immediacy. So when a behavior occurs, the more immediate that consequence is, the more it's going to influence that behavior. Typically, the recommended time is, if you go out to programming, they'll say within 2 seconds. There's a couple of research studies out there that say, up to 60 seconds is fine, whatever it may be. There's all sorts of research out there. Obviously, the more immediate it is to the behavior, the less likely you're going to have interfering stimulus. So, if you're using a bell as a reinforcer, like good job, ding, if you have a behavior and you're waiting 10 seconds to ring that bell, the kid may have a behavior and then there's a flash of light, and before you actually ring the bell, that flash of light may be the now reinforcer versus your clanging bell. So obviously if you can beat any other interfering stimulus out, all the better. So immediacy, that's what I was getting at. All right, sorry, I got a little verbose there. Questions about that one? All right, no questions, I'm immediately moving on. Magnitude, so the amount that you give them. If, kid loves chocolate and he does whatever and you say good job and you give him just a little sliver of chocolate versus a whole chocolate bar, obviously that's going to affect the behavior. Later on, you weigh that with satiation. So If he eats the whole chocolate bar, he's done. It changes the MO, but we'll talk more about that later. Consistency. We talked a little bit about this, and it sounds like Paul talked about a little bit this in his class. If you're teaching new behavior, be very consistent with your delivery of reinforcement. If you're trying to maintain or strengthen behavior, you want to use it as more intermittent. So that consistency varies. All right. And then unavailability of competing reinforcements. And, oh, wow, I just totally blanked on the technical term that we're going to be talking about with this one.
Does anybody have coffee?
Am I getting that bored?
So I don't see an IV laying around anywhere, so.
So, in regards to competing reinforcement, this involves unavailability of competing reinforcement. So if a kid is more interested in, let's say, escaping from behavior versus getting that chocolate bar, you kind of weigh the pros and cons of, or this kid technically would weigh the pros and cons. If I run out of the room, I don't have to do the work. Screw the chocolate bar, I don't care about that. Or another kid might say, I really, really want that chocolate bar, I'm gonna stick around, for that. They kind of look at matching law. There we go, thank you. Got it. It's called the matching law if you want to look it up in your books later. You basically weigh the pros and cons of, value of escaping or getting that reinforcement. So that involves the competing reinforcement. All right, that was the boring part, my lecture, yada, yada, yada. It's activity time, hooray! All right, hey, divide into 3 groups. Amazing, you guys are in 3 groups already. Some sort of planning went on. All right.
You were really drunk.
All right, so this is a very different activity than what we've been doing. We're going to have, hopefully people, all the groups have someone with their book. All right, if you don't, we're going to disperse books up here. All right, what I want you guys to do is one group's going to get figure 12.4, one group's going to get 12.5, and one group's going to get 12.7. So, by a show of thumbs, which group wants 12.4? All right, Team Iwata, they've got 12.4. All right, which group? Before we start this exercise, this activity, quick show of hands, how many people have presented graphs in front of people before?
Oh, I think so, I don't know.
Very few. All right. Theoretically, you're going to have to do a lot of presenting graphs down the road as an ABA person. It's a good time to learn. Expect to get things wrong and misinterpret things, but that's how we're going to learn. So, first of all, just set away that I'm embarrassed. I can't afford to get things wrong, because you guys are going to get things wrong. They were asking me about a question on a graph. I haven't looked at these graphs honestly for a week, and I was trying to remember what exactly this graph was showing. So I gave her wrong information until we looked at. So I looked at my notes and I was like, oh, whoops. So you have to be ready to admit that on occasion you're going to be wrong, and be prepared for the correction. So, all right. With that being said, before we go to the actual presentation of the activities, me being always a wily individual, last week it was the candy. This week we're going to talk a little bit about escape and avoidance. So we have our groups. Are we able to escape from this activity?
Yes.
Yes?
Briefly.
Briefly, maybe by...
If you throw some coffee out there and then lock you out.
I went out
after
there.
you go, yeah, we can
That would be
escape.
escaping. Okay. Exactly. In regards to avoidant behavior, out of curiosity, and you guys probably didn't even think about this necessarily, Team Sundberg took 12.7. Team Iwata took 12.4. I don't know about you guys, but usually for me, I'm like, I don't want to be the first person to present.
We don't care.
You don't care? Okay. Well, for me, I know I would say internally to myself, I don't want to be the first person to present, so I'm going to take the 12.7, and that way, or the 12.5, so I don't have to go first. So I don't, did anybody actually internally think that at all?
I think that was given to us.
We were looking,
you-
actually,
you
we were
guys
looking
have
for
the
the best chart.
Yeah, we looking for the.
Okay, so you guys were looking for the best chart. So, if I haven't let you guys look at the best chart, some people may have said, I want to take 12.7 or 12.5 to avoid that behavior.
So you just choose that.
So,
All of them are very
So it's
hard.
gonna make it so hard.
they're all very hard, but you may have wanted to postpone your presentation.
If you wanted to postpone like the anxiety from waiting,
Yep.
would taking the first one also be avoidant or no?
No, because then you're not postponing your anxiety, you're jumping right in
Okay.
and taking care of it.
On the other hand, you may be getting rid of the anxiety quicker by
Yeah.
doing it first.
Yeah.
Right.
Because anticipation just builds
Builds.
upon anxiety.
Okay, and so maybe that's the case.
You
So
sweat more.
right, so thinking about all that,
Or you're just happy.
thinking all about that, that would affect, I guess, that would affect your behavior on which graph you chose, right? Me being the, shrewd individual, I didn't put the graphs in order, so it doesn't mean 12.4 is going first.
No, I think we were
It
first.
says 12.5 is going on.
I already have it all pre-planned. So, with that, whoops, wrong direction. All right, 12.7 gets to go first. So, who would like to come up here or your whole group can actually come up here.
I'm just gonna say.
All point.
All right. Ah, no.
It's fine. Okay, I'm done. Okay, I'm not done. Okay.
In order to decrease your anxiety,
I'm not anxious.
good. I'm going to help walk you through this graph with a series of questions.
Can
And
we
let's-
remove the
Yeah, let's
squiggly,
remove the
please?
squiggly because that's
Remove that.
really
I got it.
confusing.
It's a confounding area.
I was gonna say, where did that come from?
And you guys are going to be doing this exact activity for your final. So this is good practice.
Okay.
But you'll be doing it in smaller groups. First of all, before you start, talk about your participants in this experiment.
Oh, okay. Well, mentally retarded, sleep deprived versus not sleep deprived.
Okay. How many participants did you have in the study?
How many participants?
Yes.
Actually, I don't know. I think one.
Okay. So one participant.
One.
All right. What is the target behavior for this one?
The target behavior is
Aggression.
aggression. That's right, aggression.
And how would you know this if you just looked at the graph?
Actually, over here.
There you go. Y-axis.
Right here.
Percentage
Look at
of
the
intervals of
independent variable,
aggression.
which is always on the y-axis.
Yep. All right.
Oh,
Hey.
wait.
Do I need to take that remote away?
I think so.
All right.
Now I
So-
know what your problem was.
What was the stimulus in this one?
A demand activity,
A demand activity. There's another stimulus in this one.
attention.
Attention. All right. How do you know that this is, or was this, negative reinforcement?
Well, we noticed that as demands increased and sleep was deprived, that the person actually became more aggressive. So conversely, if the demand was lessened, the person became less aggressive.
Okay.
And if it was just attention, the best scenario possible.
Okay. Does everybody see, I guess going back to the stimulus, everybody see the difference between the
This is
demand and the attention piece of
Less
this
sleep,
graph?
this was more sleep.
So,
Yeah.
all right.
The demand is the boxes, and the attention is the
Is the
circles,
circles.
whether they're filled in or not.
And again, the open one is more sleep. And the closed or the darkened ones are less sleep. So think of dark as worse.
Just put it down.
Dark is worse.
Okay.
She's playing with me.
Yeah. All right. In
So
this,
the-
oh, go ahead.
Sorry, the square.
These squares,
So the clear one, the white one, it's more demand, so the ones that you were touching right now?
no, these are all both demand situations, but this is when a person didn't have any, hardly, less than 5 hours of sleep. This is the demand when they had more than 5 hours of sleep. So you can see when they had less sleep, they were
Right,
acting
yes.
out much more. When they had more sleep, they were acting out less. And when it was attention, not a demand situation, but more of a praise situation, they were doing the best.
Okay, to clarify something there. In this case, this is a good look at a functional analysis here. If this was a kid that we were studying and trying to figure out what the function of the behavior is or what drives the behavior, in this case, attention has no effect. It doesn't matter whether they're demands, attention, whatever it was. You can see that the attention piece of things, the same attention was given through all the phases.
It's consistent.
It's consistent.
But when you reduce
No matter
the
what his
demands-
percentage of intervals of aggression was plateaued. So attention doesn't make a difference to this kid. However, the demand does, and this is a really interesting piece because they have demand in two different situations. Basically sleep deprived and not sleep deprived. So knowing this, Team Sundberg, if we looked at our 4-term contingency, how would we fill in our 4-term contingency here? What would go in each box?
Deprivation is
Sleep
sleep.
deprivation would be your MO.
Antecedent would be a demand.
The demands placed on them.
Behavior would be the aggression.
Good.
And the consequence would be what happened.
The consequence would be the attention?
It could be. Do they say what they use for a consequence in that?
I don't
Actually, I
think so.
don't
I
think
don't
we just
think
sort
they
of
did.
focus on the interpreting the graph itself in isolation from the text.
It's very possible that the removal of the demand was actually the consequence.
That would make sense, that would make sense. I think if you were working with this kid, you would really want to focus on removing demands to increase positive behaviors.
You got it.
And making sure they get enough sleep.
Okay. So yes, in this case, the demand is the consequence. So it was an escape behavior here. So a demand was placed on the students. And when they had a lot of physical aggression, that demand may have been taken away or not. And so they looked at, obviously, the more demands they put on the students, the aggression increased. And so the student was using that physical aggression to try to get out of the demands. So.
It's just kind of interesting that they kind of peaked here. It would be interesting to see what happened more down the road and more
Yeah.
in terms of baseline.
So, all right. The only other thing I would have you guys point out on this would be just get familiar with a graph itself. How many sessions were involved in this?
Well, we're up to about 20.
Yeah, about 20. So, all right. Sounds good. Any questions on that?
No one knows.
All right.
Shane's laughing at me.
So, next group.
Yeah.
I think this is 12.4? Nope, 12.5. Sorry. All right. Who from 12.5 wants to come up and give it a try at this one?
Oh my goodness, that one was.
This one, I was very frustrated with.
Yeah.
I'm so glad you
I may have some questions for you.
Oh, I thought it was gonna go there.
He's escaped.
Over here.
You go.
No, that's not our.
That's not your graph, okay.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, he totally misled me. I thought he was 12.5. You want the clicker? Yeah, you just point.
Yeah.
You just point. All right. So.
I mean, I looked at it earlier and I thought it was confusing.
Okay. I got my notes now. Okay, go for it. Do you want me to guide you through?
I probably
probably can start and then,
Okay,
yes.
that sounds good, and whatever you miss, I'll ask a question.
And
you can
initially,
definitely-
of course, it looked like a bunch of confusing, what we figure maybe scatter plots.
Okay. Then not, but.
But yeah. Anyways, so we had three participants,
Good.
and it was children who had this thing of refusal of chronic food refusal. And so with the first participant, we noticed they introduced, for their baseline, it was positive reinforcement. And so it was for less than 15 sessions where they introduced toys to them. If they eat, they would give them toys, but it still wasn't working. So they decided to do negative reinforcement where they did physical guidance and non-removal of spoon. With the physical guidance, they would put a spoon and, you know, kind of open the mouth to have them eat. Non-removal of spoon, they just place the spoon by the lips and hope that they would open and eat. So when that was done, you know, there was improvements in the eating behavior. And then they decided to just use one because, you know, it was more immediate, the physical guidance. And so we realized with just the one, the physical guidance, and it increases, the behavior was increased, or they started eating more often. And it happened with all three persons. For the three persons, the baseline was longer for each person. And in terms of sessions, they had more sessions, which pretty much, this was the worst case with this person was not interested in toys any at all. Like some of us weren't interested in chocolates last time. So we realized that that wasn't working.
Okay.
I can finish.
That was actually very well done.
Very.
How do you, just to kind of push the point again, how do you know it was negative reinforcement?
Okay, so it was more
You could look to your team
like
and point to
forcing
them.
them to, it wasn't rewarding them for eating, it was saying, okay, you need to eat, or else,
In order to.
yeah.
So for the removal of the reinforcement, increased behavior.
Right.
Okay.
To increase-
So they didn't
On
continue
this,
the
on this
tolerance.
graph, first of all, how do you know it's reinforcement?
There's a line.
Because of behavior.
All right, so you have your baseline,
Yes, the
which is always a
baseline
good thing to
was,
have, and you see how low it is. And then you see, obviously, an
there
increase in
was
behavior.
increase, yeah.
So we know it's definitely reinforcement.
Mhm.
Now, how do we know it's the negative reinforcement, though?
Because it was a non-removal of spoon and the physical guidance. So it was, you're not removing the stimulus to get the,
Okay, so this, correct me if I got this one slightly wrong. Like I said, it's been a week since I looked at it. Really gotta brush up on looking right at, like 20 minutes before class. So the students, they would be given food and they would eat it. That was considered acceptance. If they didn't eat it,
It would stay.
the experimenters would, you know, physically guide it or like stick it right in front of their mouth until they actually ate. So if the student ate, they wouldn't have that annoyance of having to
Right,
spoon
the
it
spoon,
right.
they would take that away.
They would take that away, so hopefully that would increase the student actually eating on their own.
Right.
So they're removing that annoying spoon.
or them forcing the
Or
mouth
forcing them.
open, so they didn't want to have them force the mouth open.
Yep. Exactly. So, that was good. So let me, down the road, we'll talk about, I would ask, what was the interventions used here? And this graph tells you or lays out very specifically.
So the physical guidance.
Physical guidance, which we would call physical prompts as a broad general piece of things. And then we would say negative reinforcement because you have an annoying thing right there, which should be the spoon piece of things. All right? And
For this person though, for Pam, it was like pretty much almost consistent except just two, you know, these two slightly off. So then it would be like, you know, I don't know if we'd continue over that period to say, okay,
yeah.
use physical guidance versus, because it wasn't that much significant of a difference.
Yeah, that's interesting. I was trying to figure out what's going on with Pam.
Yeah.
Because her initial of acceptance, that's how they were originally, right? Before they started.
So she had 100% the very first session.
Like, she was, at first, it's she, right?
Yeah,
Like, at first,
Pam.
very interested in the toy, but it's like lost interest once she got the toy. So
Okay.
the second time, and like, it didn't work for her at all. And then later it fluctuates a little bit, and by like later, she lost the interest in toys, like completely.
Yeah, but then with when the non-removal of spoon, you know, she started, but there was not much significance in terms of the non-removal of spoon and the physical guidance for her. While the others you could see clearly, like the difference.
Yeah.
It was more
Acceptance
significant.
between
She
one another.
She probably liked the person who was giving her.
You're talking about the very first one?
No, yeah, Pam, was it Pam? I'm thinking maybe she liked the person who was giving her
The physical
Yeah.
guidance and the non-removal.
Very good, yeah, they were one and the same.
Okay, so
Oh, maybe.
So what I would rather talk about in this one is, first of all, if we ran the session once and we had this, and we're like, oh, 100%. This kid doesn't need this intervention.
Right, yeah.
Obviously, she was chosen because there was constant observation and someone said, there's a socially significant issue that we need to address here. But this is why it's important always to do more than just one session. You always want to try to get a trend in your baseline. So it's very possible that, and since this was a published study, this probably didn't happen, but it's possible that the individual that did this didn't know how to record the data correctly. And they were just counting everything as a correct response, even though it may not have been.
Or could it be that maybe she just liked the attention so much that first shot?
Maybe.
She did.
Yeah, it's possible. Yeah, I doubt that's the situation because later on,
She went.
these would still be attention as well. And typically when you do these sessions, you're not doing them one after the other. So it's doubtful she got satiated on attention. So I doubt that's what it is. My guess is it's probably either an error in recording, or they used some preferred food and the other ones that they used a different type of food, whatever it may
Well,
be.
these were toys.
Oh, these were toys. Different. Why were they using a spoon then?
Well, they gave them toys.
The
The
toys didn't
baseline was
work.
the positive reinforcement that didn't work.
So they would
And
get a
so-
toy if they ate on their
Right.
own?
Okay.
Yeah.
Right. So, but here they're looking at the trials
Oh,
of
the-
acceptance.
Okay.
So this is whether they ate the food or not. And they may have been positively reinforced by getting the food, the toy,
So-
if they ate their food.
Right.
But that's not necessarily, I mean, that's the differential reinforcement piece of things. So the next thing that we can take a look at is, so here's an intervention they used, was the positive reinforcement piece of things. Obviously, it's not functional for these individuals. So then they implement a negative reinforcement piece of things. In regards to Pam, it's very possible that Pam is a very quick learner with negative reinforcement.
Or she's masochist?
She wouldn't be masochist because then she would accept the fact that having a spoon waved in front of her mouth.
Well, it kind of looks like she was liking it.
Because-
She liked it, because
She didn't, well, she didn't really like it because she
No.
ate the food, so it could have been.
She responded to it.
She responded to it by
Okay.
eating the food, so the
Taken
spoon would be
away.
removed away.
Yeah.
So definitely not masochistic, quite the opposite. So, but it's possible. Did they say what the disability of these individuals were?
No,
Okay.
they just said
Just
pediatric.
feeding
food.
Chronic food.
The what?
Chronic food.
A feeding disorder, but it's possible that, you know, let's say they're developmentally disabled.
It didn't say.
It didn't say, but it's possible that Calvin and Donna are, you know, more severe in their, you know, mental retardation, their
Than-
developmental disability than Pam. Pam may have been higher functioning and said, oh, I got that cause and effect much quicker.
Okay.
But the end result is that they all
Just saying,
got
yeah.
it. Now, the other problem, the problem with this graph that I would argue with is they use, and you guys definitely want to keep this in mind when you're doing your own studies, they use physical guidance, which is physical prompt, and non-removal of the spoon at the same time. And then later, when they use them again, they're all pretty high here. we don't know which intervention actually worked for the individual, which is a problem. What's nice about this graph, and have you guys learned about the different graphs, like alternating treatment designs?
Just
Yes,
last week.
yes.
Okay, so what type of graph is this?
Alternating
One where they have two going.
comparison.
All right, it's partially an alternating treatments, because they are switching between physical guidance and non-removable spoon.
And it's also comparing.
It's comparing, but what do we call that comparison? I'll just give it to you. It's a delayed multiple baseline, because here we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 baseline sessions. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, and then obviously a whole bunch here. Probably about 25. So we're able to argue in this case that the interventions used were effective, and it wasn't just due to maturity. So it wasn't like Calvin over a period of time, said, it's about time for me to eat. And at the same time, Pam was like, oh yeah, it's time for me to eat. And then, who was the other one? Donna said the same thing. So it wasn't like, assuming that they're all in the same facility, it wasn't like, oh, now we're gonna serve pancakes, everybody's favorite thing, at the same time, because clearly not everybody went up at the same time.
What is the baseline,
Yeah.
the sampling of the baselines on the third one? I mean, there's.
Why did they take
So
so
long?
long to do it? Yeah.
They may have just done that to really emphasize the difference in baselines for all these individuals. I would say, obviously you've got a trend
I
right
would-
there.
Yeah.
I would have stopped right.
Earlier.
They do it mainly to emphasize that the effectiveness is the intervention and doesn't have to do with any other outside variables, such as maturity, time of day, whatever it may be. It's also very possible that, maybe there were things that were inhibiting Donna from participating in this. They didn't have enough staff to do all three at the same time.
Do you think maybe because they had just one peak there?
No.
Maybe they kept going or?
No, I wouldn't say that. I'd probably, if anything, I'd say they might have done it for staffing reasons.
Okay.
That they couldn't do physical guidance and non-removal of all three at the same time. So they're like, all right, by the time right when we're about to move Calvin on, that's when we'll start Donna. So, but yeah, probably no specific reason. All right.
I have a question.
Yep.
So why, in the end, the practitioner gave up using the non-removal of spoon and only use physical guidance? Is that because it gets tired to hold the food, or
No, with the delayed multiple baseline, you're trying to eliminate all variables that may, and really pinpoint out what is
so they
functioning.
found that's what works better?
Well, that's ultimately what you want to try to determine. But the problem is that they use both of these variables right here in phase 2 for all the students.
Yeah.
And every single one after that is a high rate. So the problem is that they said, okay, let's remove physical guidance and just try the non-removable spoon. And if the behavior had dipped down, back down to this, then they could argue it's probably the physical guidance and implement that. And if that dipped down, then you have to use both variables to actually get a change in behavior. But unfortunately for them, the students all learned after that second phase, and they can't necessarily determine which one was the causing factor.
Well, why didn't they at least test the empty ones? Which one is the empty ones? The non-removal of the spoon.
Yeah.
Why didn't they at least test that hypothesis as well?
They did. That's this one right here. That's phase 3.
Oh, that's the little tiny spoons.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
I see.
So that's where you're.
Okay,
They have
I
it
see,
labeled
I
up
see.
there.
They
So
just didn't label it the same because they have withdrawal and as they have
Yeah.
physical guidance. Why didn't they say withdrawal physical guidance?
Right.
I don't know. I'm not sure why they said that.
This is, again, is this a concocted example,
Oh,
or is this an actual study?
Because this, they're probably using it as like a negative stimulus. And so they just label this as negative stimulus. So withdrawal of negative stimulus.
But I guess what I'm asking is why didn't they say withdrawal of
Because-
PG over there?
Because what they're talking about is the withdrawal of the spoon not the withdrawal of the intervention. So they're saying we're withdrawing the spoon, not we're withdrawing that intervention.
Yeah, so they just the non-withdrawal of spoon
Taking the spoon out of the kid's
technique,
mouth.
and then they just do physical guidance only.
But if we withdraw the spoon, why is like withdraw an as? It should be like withdraw as spoon. Because it's like inside the parentheses is like an as means non-removal of the spoon. It means they try to stop using that intervention, right?
No, this means that they use only that intervention. So the student eats, they can withdraw that negative stimulus.
So could that imply
So now you guys
that
are,
both treatments are working?
both treatments could be working.
Based on
But
Yeah.
that does not imply that.
No, we don't know that because they learn the behavior over here. We don't know which one worked.
I have a
So.
quick question.
Yep.
I don't know, why do they have this one thing and they say,
Because,
it's just an example to show that.
no. So being good data collectors here, somebody messed up and presented reinforcement in this one situation. So someone,
so they had to
mark that
acknowledge
this
it.
occurred,
Okay.
which ironically dropped that behavior down.
Which is
So
probably
you've
the same
given them
person with the
positive
100%.
Yeah, it could have been the same person here. It's very
We
possible.
need to get rid of that person.
So, but as good scientists, you have to report any errors you make. So, yeah, so that's why that's there, and there's an extra little label.
So these are actual published studies, or is this something that's concocted for the?
No, this was actual published
Actual
study,
study, okay.
yeah. And so, talking about all this confusion, you guys can, hopefully, when you're making your own graphs,
Do it.
be like,
Avoid
all right,
confusion.
this is gonna be really confusing, or you ask your peer, if I give you this graph, could you explain it to me? So hopefully, going over some of this will help clarify better graphs from you guys. And I don't know when this study came out, it may have been one of the earlier studies, but,
I have a quick question.
Yep.
I saw it because it says like physical guidance is force kids to open the mouth. So
Yeah.
it's like physical. So will that related to the ethical problem, like concern about, could I?
it could, and we'll talk about some of the ethical concerns during ethics of, are you gonna weigh possibly bruising the kid's mouth versus having the kid starve to death?
So is that because that my concern is like it's not become the negative reinforcement, become the punishment. Is that possible?
Well, here, once again, you're looking at whether the behavior increases or decreases. Obviously, the behavior increased,
Yes.
so it's a reinforcement procedure.
Okay.
And yes,
But still have the ethical concern, right?
there's probably some ethical concerns. If there's tissue damage, you always have to look at that. But you have to, once again, weigh, if this kid isn't accepting food at all, is getting skinnier and skinnier, and has basically a failure to thrive, it's better to jam it down their throat and have them survive versus dying on you. So,
And hospitals will just put an IV in you without your permission and.
yeah.
That probably would have been a better negative than a physical.
Yeah. Yeah, so they could argue maybe, non-removable spoon, having an annoying spoon there is much better than like grabbing you and pulling your jaw up. So, yeah. All right, last group. Now we're behind. All right. Who else to go for this one?
They voted for me.
Go for it.
We're voting for you too. You haven't even started.
We're agreeing. That's that.
Done, all right.
Okay. So for participants, we had 5, and they were talking about negative reinforcement. So they're talking about self-injurious behavior, and they refer to it as IEB. And we see in these two graphs that the negative reinforcement is taking place because initially, even though, I'll point out to some of the errors in the graphs, even though they started low and they have different y-axis, you know, okay, they have different ones. We can see that this one, it's going up. This one as well. This one, we kind of see the trend going down. Initially, I just ignore this one because it doesn't give you a whole lot of information other than the cumulative and until it reach plateau. So it's just a waste of space, I think. So we see the negative reinforcements in the first two ones, because whenever you present the demand, which is the stimulus, the behavior increases.
Well, okay,
Does
so,
it make sense?
so what is your target behavior in this graph?
Self-stimulus behavior.
Self-injurious behavior.
Injurious, I'm sorry.
Injurious. No, that's fine. So an SIB is a very common acronym that you'll see through the literature, so it's good to get to know some of that now. What was the antecedent? So
The demand.
So demand is
task
placed-
demand.
So task demand, so demand is placed on them. The behavior is self-injurious behavior. And what is the consequence here?
So the consequence, they were talking about whether or not the self-injurious behavior increases or decreases. I'm not sure.
So
What's
what-
the consequence?
Help from the team, what's the consequence?
I think they were just going back to
Wasn't the antecedent the removal of the demand? Or do we not state it that way?
escaping from the behavior.
Yes, the removal.
So escape from the demand.
Escape from the task demand.
Yes,
So that's the consequence.
escape. Yes.
So demand is put on them, they have self-injurious behavior, SIB, and the demand is removed as soon as that behavior is exhibited. Is that right? I should have brought my book so I could quickly sort out. Okay.
Can you- Is it?
Well,
The consequence.
we'll roll with that.
Yes, the escape.
All right, so in that case, this is negative reinforcement because, well, it's not.
Just for the first two.
I was gonna say, which ones are negative reinforcement?
Just
This
the
one?
first two.
All right, exactly. So what is it for these guys then?
It's positive
Yeah.
positive reinforcement.
Not positive reinforcement. So same thing as these guys. Something's removed. What'd you say?
Behavior is decreasing.
The
It's a
behavior's
punishment
going
procedure.
down.
Is it punishment?
Behavior's going down.
It's
Because
a
they were
negative
talking
punishment.
about the problem with individualized assessments.
Which is what behavioral analysis is all about. We don't do group assessment, we look at individual assessment. Because in this case, the intervention is the same for everybody. A
And they
task
all-
is given, as soon as that student has behaviors, they take the task away. So, we see that increases for these two, and we know that they're all about escape, escape contingencies. That's what their behavior is driven by. Larry here
There's
doesn't phase it. You could leave the demand there, you could take the demand away, doesn't phase it. He's not falling into any of those principles of behavior right now. It's not punishment
It's
or
not working.
reinforcement for him. Larry's just Larry. We don't know what his self-injurious behaviors do to yet. Mike, is that Mike or Milk?
Milt.
Milt, okay. Milk's a weird one. Okay, so for these guys, it's negative punishment. They probably like demands. All right, so when you take that away, their behavior, you said this is self-injurious behavior.
The problem behavior stays in all of them, but for the last two, it goes down.
Right. So actually, I was having it the other way around. So if the demand's being taken away, these guys like the demand on them.
Right.
They enjoy it, so maybe they're getting attention out of it. These guys don't like the demand.
So they're becoming
So
more injurious.
they're becoming less injurious.
Oh, less.
Yeah, so these guys are more your escape, these guys want the attention piece of things. So if that's the way we're interpreting graphs, sorry about that, folks. That was-
Does it say what the demand was? Does it?
Um,
explain what they were doing or the removing?
They just were talking about a task demand that was aversive.
Yeah.
So something aversive.
If we pull the article, they'll outline it much more specifically.
1995.
And maybe that's why, next time we do this activity, I'll do that. I'll pull out the articles and give those to you guys ahead of time, so you know exactly what's going on. The book just kind of scans over it quickly. So the whole point of this exercise I really want you guys to do is start getting used to looking at graphs and analyzing it. So, and I apologize, I didn't look at this last night, just to refresh my memory. So, we are not gonna have time for activity 4, but I'll show it to you and hopefully walk through it quickly. Wow, there's so many tables. All right, so what I was gonna have you guys do in groups of 3 and 4, using one of the scenarios I was gonna give you, you guys were actually gonna design your own negative reinforcement experiment. So you were gonna talk about what your target behavior is, what your intervention was gonna be, and then you were gonna kind of make up data to show that. So, and those different scenarios, if you want to just kind of ponder this on your way home, is if you're providing behavioral consultation to school and parent at home, a student is refusing to complete his work in class, how could you use negative reinforcement to get them to do their work? You're providing sports behavioral consultation to a football team. The wide receiver is not running the pattern specified by his coach. How could you use negative reinforcement to get him to run his patterns? Or someone's miscounting her register at the end of the shift. Once again, this causes the manager additional time money. How could you assist that manager in getting their employee to do that correctly? So, without firing the individual.
Okay.
So you guys can kind of think about that stuff on the way home. So let's go over our objectives again real quick to see what I've totally confused you guys on. Who wants to quickly define what negative reinforcement is?
The removal of a stimulus to increase behavior.
Exactly. Removal of stimulus to increase behavior. Perfect. And who wants to provide one example?
The spoon to the.
Removing the veggies.
All right, removing the veggies, removing the spoon to increase eating behavior. All right. Okay. Well, we just talked about in the spoon example. What is the negative reinforcer there?
The non-removal of the spoon.
The removal of the spoon from their face. Okay. Use appropriate parameters and schedules of reinforcement. So we talked about some of the effectiveness of negative reinforcers. So one of those being consistency, and I touched real quickly on it. What are their schedules of reinforcement? What are some things?
Immediacy,
Well,
magnitude,
immediacy,
consistency.
consistency. But when we talk about consistency, what do we mean by that?
The time.
Very,
That every single time.
Whether it's presented every single time,
Or intermittent.
or what we would say intermittently. So we didn't only touch on that because we're going to talk about schedules of reinforcement later. Okay, state and plan for the possible unwanted effects of the use of negative reinforcement. We didn't talk about this, so I apologize, but no, I don't need it. Okay. Sometimes when you remove things like, you want the kid's being physically aggressive, and they have a preferred toy there. As soon as they become physically aggressive, you take the toy away because you want to increase appropriate behavior. Sometimes you end up getting increased physical aggression, and so that's some unwanted effects that you may have. So, and we'll talk more about that when we get next quarter, maybe at the end of this one, when we talk about extinction bursts and various things like that. So, all righty.
All right. Thank you.
Have a good night.